1903 air observation flight.
Okay, good. Right, so Dennis, before we get to career, before we get to the Air Force, everything, just tell me a bit about who you are, where are you from, what was your life like during the war, what shaped you?
Well, I grew up with my grandparents in Northern Ireland. I was taken over there when I was about 3 for a change of air, and I never came back, so I was brought up in Northern Ireland. During the war, of course, I was too young, but I used to see lots of aircraft.
Whereabouts in Northern Ireland?
County Down. I'm right up on the border, near a place called Warren Point, right on the border. Of course, I had an interest in aircraft in as much as I saw them most days flying up and down. And then the Americans had a base there about 12 miles away, and that sort of really got me into aircraft. I was so keen, in fact, I cycled 12 miles just to the place where the Americans were, even climbed over the ditch and touched one, would you believe? Big deal for me at that time. Anyway, I was fancy joining the Air Force. I left school at 14.
Are you from a big family?
Yeah, I had 4 of us. There were 4. There was my eldest sister, and then after I went to Ireland, I had another brother and then another sister who were younger than me. But I didn't see them until about 1940. 39, 40.
Were you a rich family or a poor family?
No, I lived on an Irish farm with my grandparents. He was an ex-army man, and he was from Cornwall, and his wife was from Northern Ireland. He obviously met her when Newry, which was the next town, was a garrison town, and that's when he obviously met her. And they travelled, because he was in the army, they travelled extensively, and they had 4 children of their own. And then, of course, they settled there, bought this small farm, and that's what I grew up on. Had all sorts of chores to do, and
nice life.
Never did me any harm. No, no. He was, mind you, he was an ex-RSM, and then he got commissioned. And when he said jump, I said how high. You know, he was very disciplined. But I don't think it did me any harm. No. And then I fancy joined the Air Force, and as I say, I left school at 14.
Can I just ask about your schooling? What was schooling like in Ireland? I mean, what did you know of the world, and what did you know? You know, how educated were you there?
Well, when I started school, I can't even remember starting school. When people say they can remember this, remember that, I don't remember starting school. And I lived about 2 miles out in the country, and I started off with school which had 3 classes. That's I suppose it would be 5 when I started school. Then you moved on to the 2nd class. Then you moved into the headmaster's class, which was the senior class. There wasn't a secondary school in Warren Point, so when I left there, I had to go to Newry every day by train. And I went to a place called the Newry Model School, which was a secondary school. I don't think I was a very bright student, but when I...
Did you know much about the world? I mean, did you know about Asia and Korea? And...
Well, I suppose I knew more than a lot of kids, only as much that my grandfather, we had wireless, you know, we didn't have electricity in our house. We had a wireless operated off a battery, and they obviously were interested in the world news and the whole war. So I suppose I wouldn't say I had to listen to it, but I listened to it because that was the done thing in the house. Korea, the only thing I could think about Korea was I used to save stamps when I was a kid, and I always remember, I never thought of it till much later in life, I had Korean stamps, would you believe? Yeah, wow. Yeah. And
so it had registered, because that's really unusual actually. Most people had no idea where Korea was.
Well, yeah, I think because the radio was on, I was interested in all things that were happening, you know, and it was mainly the war in Europe. And of course I had 3 uncles, and one of them, and they were all in Hong Kong, they worked in Hong Kong. The eldest one, he escaped and went to Australia, and the other 2 were captured in Hong Kong because they were the Hong Kong Defence Force, so they were taken prisoners. And my eldest uncle's son, Freddie, he got captured as well. So I had two uncles and a cousin who were prisoners of war in Hong Kong. Stanley Road prison it was, yeah. So I was always interested in the war and how progress was, and Battle of Britain and all that sort of stuff. I was quite young, but I was still interested.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
And so you left school at 14,
yeah.
and you had an interest in the military, but obviously you're not allowed to join. What did you do in that interim period? Well,
when I left school, in the meantime, I should say, in the meantime, my grandfather and grandmother had both died. My grandfather died in 1945, actually. But, and my mother, who was living in Bristol then with my brothers and sisters, she came over at 1940 and to look after them. So I hadn't seen my family since I was a kid, you know, so I was introduced to my new brothers and sisters, that kind of thing. When I left school at 14, I had to get a job, so I went to the, I was going to be a carpenter, and I went to the I went to the Catholic firm to see if I could get a job there. No, but wouldn't it be a good idea if you went to the Protestant firm? This is Ireland at that time. Went to the Protestant firm. I still didn't get a job as a carpenter. So I finished up being a cycle mechanic, working for a Catholic firm, would you believe? But yeah, I was a cycle mechanic. So in the meantime, my mother had spoken to the headmaster of the technical college in Newry and said he was interested in joining the Air Force. And he said, well, it would be, he looked at my sort of qualifications. He said, well, I think it'd be a good idea if he went to night tech and got himself up to date with the exams he would require to be a Royal Air Force aircraft apprentice. So at 16, they must have been desperate because I did pass the exams. 16, I joined up as in the RAF as a Halton apprentice, which was a very good start. It was a 3-year apprentice scheme. And yeah, I was in the Air Force from age of 16, yeah.
Was it as exciting and as you know, as you'd hoped it would be?
Well, it was, that 3 years was very disciplined. We wore uniform all the time. Officially, you weren't allowed to go out with girls unless you had a chit from your parents saying you could do. You weren't allowed to drink, but, you know, as it is. So it was very strict, and the whole thing was general service training, all, you know, firing rifles and all drill and that kind of thing. Lots of PT, lots of sports, education, because we did proper education, you know, and technical training. And the technical training covered, God, every welding, metal repairs, hydraulics, pneumatics, brazing, air conditioning, all sorts of things that were associated with aircraft. And our training aircraft were Spitfires and Hurricanes, and I think we had a Mosquito or something like that there, yeah. But yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. Very, very.
Did you get up in the air at all?
My first flight while I was an apprentice was in Tiger Moth. My second flight was in a Domini, you know, the twin, the biplane Domini, flown by a Polish pilot. I always remember that was that. They were the only 2 flights I had while I was there. But I enjoyed it. I got in Ireland, at the schools I went to, we never had any sports. Wednesday afternoon at my first school was gardening. So we all went in and looked after the headmaster's garden. He must have had the best garden in Ireland because we did that. But no sports, none whatsoever. Wow. Yeah. So when I joined the Air Force, of course, I took advantage of every opportunity to play sports, cross country. And coming from a place where there was the sea, I wasn't a swimmer. But I for some reason or other, went down swimming. I just came to it, and I finished up getting my colours there for swimming and water polo. And went on in the Air Force, played for the Air Force, water polo and swam. Cool. So that was fine, yeah. Then, of course, after 3 years, went on leave, and then we got my first posting, which was down to South Wales. And we were working on Mark 3A and Mark 4 Meteors, doing major overhauls and aircraft that had crashed. We were, you know, rebuilding and that sort of thing.
Where was that base?
St Athan, down in South Wales, near between Cardiff and Barry. Huge station, and I enjoyed that. That was real interesting work, and it was all metal repairs mainly, and putting back systems together. There were other aircraft there belonging to other outfits that were there. In fact, I had the Lincolns there, were training flight engineers, and they had the, I'm trying to think what the other one was, the Brigands. They came in there for servicing on another part of the unit. But I enjoyed my time there, and that was a year, what they called improver training. And it was while I was there that I met this lovely Welsh girl, and who eventually became my wife. Anyway, I was then posted to further into Wales, Pembroke Dock, down the Severn, onto Sunderland flying boats, which was absolutely great, you see, because I liked the water, although there was no facility to swim there. There was. I fell in once off an aircraft, and a good job I could swim, but there weren't no competitive swimming, so I didn't do that there. I enjoyed that, and
was that a Sunderland training base, or was that was an actual air base?
That was an air base with, I think, 2 squadrons. I can't remember the numbers of the squadrons. I was on the maintenance side, but I always remember in my memories, in my memoirs, I put about one morning, one Sunday weekend, I was on duty, because we did weekend duty, and we had an air test, and I went up into Sunderland, did the air test, and while we were up there, one engine caught fire. Anyway, we got back on the water, and we changed the engine on the water, which you could do, and that's when I fell in. I slipped on the oily wing and fell in, but I managed to recover. I enjoyed that, and then the next thing was I had a PWR, pre-warning for overseas, and I was posted to Seletar in Singapore on Sunderland flying boats, which was delighted, yeah. And I wasn't there very long, and of course the water was much warmer there should you fall in, that sort of thing, but I was experienced Sunderland man, and suddenly this notice came through. Well, I got tannoyed in the crew room. Would I report to the orderly room, you see? So I went to the orderly room, and they told me I was posted to Korea. And of course I came back to the crew room, and they said, what was that all about? Because I thought maybe I'd been in trouble. And I said, I'm posted to Korea. Of course, everybody curled up, and I thought this is a typical service wind-up, you know, which you do get in the service. Anyway, about a few days later, I realised it wasn't. I'd wrapped up the odd jobs, cleared myself from the station, and I went to Changi and took off in a Hastings, flew to Clark Field in the Philippines, stayed there the night. I mean, nowadays you'd whistle up quicker than that. And next morning up early, and I landed in Iwakuni in Japan. And I don't know what time it was, but it was in a snowstorm, and I was still in KD. I stayed there, and 4 o'clock next morning, I was on the Dakota, Australian Dakota, flying to Korea. So it all happened very quickly.
Very good.
I should have said before I went to Korea, I was aware of Korea because we always had 4 Sunderland flying boats in Iwakuni who were doing the coastal work with the American mariners, you know. So when I got to Iwakuni, I knew people who were on detachment from Singapore. They used to do something like a 3-month detachment.
Do you know, just when I think about it, do you know Stuart Holmes? Stuart Holmes.
He was a wing command, well, he was finished up as a wing. He is the only man, Air Force man, I ever meet when I go to any of the Arboretum and what have you, yeah.
What about Bob Brand?
No,
Bob
no.
Brand was 613 Squadron. He
Yeah.
was on Sundays. I interviewed him quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
He was also out in Korea. He was there at the very beginning of the war, though.
Oh, right, yes, yeah.
But yeah, no, I wanted to know that you knew Stuart, because obviously I've interviewed
I knew
Stuart
Stuart.
recently.
Yes, I have spoken to him, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, remind me after to mention another RAF chap who was seconded to he flew F-86s.
I'll ask for that.
A fella called John Boyle, I think his name was. I met him on a revisit to Korea. That's I didn't know him before that. Yeah.
Okay. What were your Iwakuni? Yeah. Just what do you remember of Iwakuni as a base?
Huge base. It was there was the Royal Australian Air Force with Mustangs and Meteors, and the Americans had Mariners there, which were an amphibian. You know, they're either up on the field or up on the airfield or in the water with the Sunderlands. Huge base, yeah. I can't remember what. Oh yes, the B-25s or 26s. I'm trying to think what the name was. They were twin-engine American bomber. They were also there. I think they operated from there. But it was a big base, huge base.
Did you meet many of the Aussies there?
Oh, I met a couple of Aussies. I met more Australian army people than I did than the Aussie airmen. Yeah, that when I went up to Korea, that's what I meant. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, sorry. So you pick up the story then. You've got to Korea, I think.
Well, yeah. At 4 o'clock, I left Iwakuni on an Aussie DAC, and we flew into Busan they call it nowadays, and then flew up to Seoul, and then the next thing was fell in. Well, you know, we don't do that in the Air Force, like kind of thing. And we marched to this what do you call it? It was a bombed out school. And that was the, what do you call the place? Transit. That was the transit place. Anyway, we just stood in the playground. I didn't know what was going on. I was the only Air Force guy there, remember. The only thing identified me, of course, was my beret, because I'd handed my Air Force uniform in Iwakuni. So we're there, then these 3 Canadian CMCs, you know, the big trucks, yeah. And they drew in and they shouted, "Anybody going up the front?" And I thought, well, that's not me. And this Aussie said, "Yep, this is you, mate," because I'd met up with a few Aussies then. And we got on the back of these GMCs they were, and we rattled our way north, because remember, there weren't any roads out there till the Americans built these earth roads, and they were all corrugated, and we just seemed to rattle away north. And
when was this year? What year was this?
1952, yeah. And when we got, a thing I always remember there was we dropped these 2 Canadians off on the way up, and they jumped over the tailboard, which you usually do. You don't do anything. And one of the Canadians left his finger behind the ring, severed his finger. Anyway, we left them and they went off to their little units, because I mean, there were little units all the way up the main supply route, the MSR. And then we got, and it was beginning to get dark now, because it'd been a long old day. And these Aussies said, well, this is where you jump off, you see. And I'm looking around thinking, where the hell is this? And they said, well, go down between that little track between the minefields, he said, and if you've gone too far, if you fall in the river, you've gone too far, you know, Aussie humour. So anyway, I went down there, and we only had 4 aircraft, and they were in revetments, sandbag revetments, and you couldn't really see much, and just the odd tents. And that was my arrival on 1903 air observation flight. And I was given 2 blankets, and I shared a tent with 2 Royal Artillery guys, you know, Pongos. And that was my introduction from Singapore, which was, yeah, you could go out every night. There was swimming, because that's where I was swimming a lot there, and all the rest of it. But that was my introduction to Korea.
That sounds idyllic.
It was. And of course, and I always, what I remember there is we're right on the south bank of the Imjim River. That's what they meant, if you fall in the river, you're going too far. And of course, through the night, I could hear gunfire and all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, this is definitely a posting with a difference. Yeah, £180 tent and 2 blankets and a couple of army guys, yeah.
Were you nervous?
Nervous? No. I've never been particularly nervous of most things, you know, and it was a new experience as far as I was concerned. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well,
what an introduction. Great for you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I'm just going to ask a bit about more. So obviously that was your night. You wake up in the morning. I don't know if you slept well or what have you, but just describe the base. What was there? What was the script like?
Well, the thing I remembered, I mean, this was my introduction to the army, remember. There weren't any trees out in Korea at that time because they'd been defoliated by the Japanese, evidently, for some reason or other. But we had to go breakfast and then muster. And I wasn't sure. I'd have thought I'd been encouraged by somebody, but anyway, I was late on the muster parade. I mean, when I'm late, I'm just start calling the roll, just about. And anyway, so I was on the charge. So my introduction to 1903 flight was being marched in front of the CO, who was a major, on a charge. And anyway, I explained the whole situation, and I think it was to make me aware I was with the army now. And anyway, it was dismissed. I went out, put my beret on, marched back in for my arrival interview. And he said, you know, it's a bright start you've made, Grogan, you see. And I thought, well, here we go. And I was going to look after his aircraft because we had the headquarters flight as such with his aircraft, the COs, and then the other 3 ABC companies sort of thing. And from then on, we got along fine, and I looked after, I mean, it was some transition from 4-engine Sunderlands to these little Osters. But I looked after it because I had my interest. I flew in it, you know, so it was good.
So what I wanted to know is just talk a bit about the Oster and what it was like for you to work on, and what it was like to fly, and what you remember of that as a...
The Oster was a very basic aircraft. It was a metal frame covered with canvas, which was really good in as much it was a practical airplane out there, whereas if we got a bullet hole, we would sew it up or put a patch on it, whereas the Americans had the L-19. It was a metal airplane, and it was a bit harder to repair than ours, so it was very practical. Ours were 2-seaters. The observer sat in the back on a little rotating seat, and the pilot sat in the front with a big radio set beside him, I think the 88 sets or something like that. When I was at Halton, I was taught how to hand swing aircraft. And I thought, Meteors, I don't need that. Sunderlands, I'm not going to be doing that. Well, when I went to Korea, I was doing that every day regularly because they were all hand-swung aircraft. There were no, self-starters on them. So yeah, I was pretty proficient at. I can even remember now, you know, the whole sequence of it: switches off, throttle closed, brakes hard on, all that sort of thing. But yeah, went along fine.
And you're communicating that to the major, aren't you?
Yeah. When you're there, you stand outside, the pilot's inside, and you go through, switch off, petrol on, throttle closed, brakes hard on. He would repeat, and then you go in, you prime it, turn the for a few times, and then you say switches on, contact, and it would start up. Most times it would start up, except in the winter it was a bit harder. But yeah.
I was going to ask you about the winter. I mean, while we were on the Oster, what was different about the aircraft and the maintenance of the aircraft and the flight of the aircraft in the winter versus the summer? Well,
because they were all in the open anyway, and the first thing we had to do was de-ice them. And we had like it was a hot air blower thing. We used to put inside the wings, you know, because they were canvas thing and all over, de-ice it. We'd have to give it lots of priming to get the oil a bit more fluid. That was in the winter. It worked. I mean, I think we were pretty good at making things work. It was important to de-ice it. The other thing was, when we refueled the aircraft, we refueled it with jerry cans and big filter, and over the filter we put chamois leather. The idea being, because all our fuel came in 45-gallon drums, we decanted it into jerry cans, and then we tip it through, and the chamois made sure that there was no water that got into the system, because that's the last thing you want in those cold conditions, you see. And we did it right through the year. It was all that sort of thing. But they were very cold, very cold. There's no heating in them as such, you know, so you wrapped yourself up well before you went flying, yeah.
Did they have a bulletproof top?
No bulletproof anything on them. Somebody said they had armour plating under the floor. I never saw any armour plating under the plywood floor. It was a plywood floor, yeah.
And how long was it? What sort of speed, what sort of height did they fly at?
Well, we used to fly around about 8,000 feet, which was high enough to be trying clear of anti-aircraft and that kind of thing. And it was a good observation height for the targets, you know. It seems like it's a long way up, 8,000 feet, but it was a good height for that sort of observation, yeah. Mind you, we used to come down lower than that sometimes on the way back, but never mind.
Okay, let's talk a bit about your role on the aircraft then, as beyond engineer. So you were doing observations as well, were you? Well,
yeah, occasional, yeah. They weren't very keen on taking us, because I think there's one or two actually got shot down and were prisoners, and there was lots of questions as to why, you know, there was an observer on board and that sort of thing. Down in Malaya, I mean, they used them regularly as observers, but out there weren't too keen on it, yeah.
Okay, and your major, he was flying, he was basically going between areas rather than actually observing over the lines, or a bit of everything?
It would all be, the artillery out there were the Royal Artillery, the Canadian Artillery and the New Zealand Artillery, so all communications would be with the artillery batteries. So when they were getting airborne, they had similar sets anyway, and of course all the communication was between them. The idea being is when they fire a shot, they could tell them whether it was short, long, left or right, and zero in on the targets and that kind of thing.
How long were they flying for?
Oh, could be up there for an hour, yeah. Depending how many engagements they were doing, you know.
Did the pilots fly with one of their ears uncovered so they could hear bullets and stuff?
No, they had, I don't know if I got any photo, but no, they had a proper headset, yeah.
Okay. Were they armed at all?
The pilots had a 9mm revolver, you know, and I used to think, well, that's a lot of good, wouldn't it, down there? But no, that's all they carried, yeah.
And you talked about there were 4 flight on your base.
There were four aircraft, and in each was a flight within its own sort of thing. And a pilot would be, generally speaking, a pilot would be allocated to each of those. But we obviously had a couple of extra pilots. We had a Canadian pilot, Australian and New Zealand pilots, I think, and the rest were Royal Artillery pilots, yeah.
And did you ever lose any?
In my time, one, yeah. In fact, it got back and it flew into the hill across the other end because it'd been, I think it'd been wounded or something like that. So we only lost one, yeah. In my time, yeah.
What was that like though? It must have been, because it's a tiny little base, isn't it? I mean, in terms of the morale and just the thing.
Yeah. I can't remember I can't remember anything. I tell you what, we did lose. Our CO had changed, and he was, I can't remember his name now, but he was coming back. He had gone over to the headquarters, which wasn't terribly far away, the Commonwealth Division headquarters, and he'd been over to have a look at the new Austin Champ, you know, the Jeep, and he was coming back in his own Jeep, coming down the side of the, because we had a cloth, an earth runway, and he's coming down the side, and there were, I don't know, he must have heard it, but there was three or four American F-84s flying down. Well, I mean, occasionally they'd fly down anyway. What happened was, one of them had been shot up, and as he turned the bottom of the earth strip, this F-84 crashed into him. Because they would, any crashed aircraft or any shot up aircraft normally try to make it to our little strip. That killed our CO, and but that was a morale, you know, lower really. There were some very sad people because he was an excellent CO, yeah.
Terrible accident.
With terrible accident, yeah. I got photographs of that, and the American pilot, when we got to him, because the aircraft had broken up, and he said, "I'm sorry about your guy," you know. We pulled him out, and he went off. But our CO, it killed him. I've got photographs of the Jeep and all that. I don't know where the camera came from, but that was the saddest thing, I think, on our lot, yeah. We had another one, it was Captain Perkins, finished up as a General, Ken Perkins. He and Ken Goodfield, who was one of the airmen, they were returning, and they flew down the river on the river patrol, and they hit a steel cable that was across the river, and Ken Goodfield was killed, was drowned and swept away. We didn't find him for a few days, and the pilot, he got out. Yeah, Ken Perkins. Yeah, that was most probably a morale thing. And the other one we had was a guy was in his tent, and it caught fire. I don't know how, but and he burnt in the tent. Yeah, so they were little things that you know, they do affect people. Yeah, but I think we're pretty. I think in those situations you're pretty resilient, and you know, life goes on, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
Were you ever strafed or attacked by Chinese aircraft?
No. In fact, the Koreans or Chinese, they never had any aircraft. They used to have what we call Bed Check Charlie, was a little aircraft that went flying around, but what I don't know what it did. It used to fly around in the evening, you know, and no, never, no.
Did you ever have journalists and the like come and visit you and sort of?
Yes, we did. I'm trying to think. He was I can't remember his name, but he was one of the big journalists at that time, and I always remember he wanted to show us these films that he'd taken of, you know, while he'd been out there. And I wasn't particularly interested in, you know, we see enough of ourselves, you see. And I said this, and my CO said to me, "You will," because we were quite close within the thing, "you will attend that, Corporal Grogan." I thought, well, there you go.
It wasn't Dryberg, was it? It wasn't Dryberg, Thomas Dryberg?
No. You know, the name doesn't come to me, but he was one of the pretty famous war correspondents. The thing that always, when I went there, the thing that fascinated him, he'd taken a picture of this bit of ground with a little track, and it was Americans, and this guy, a big black man, had been shot, and he was sort of laying across the track. And this, for some reason, fascinated this correspondent, in as much that there was this big man, you know, and suddenly that he was dead. I could never get my head around why it was so important to him. We'd seen dead people before, you know, but this black man was a huge black man. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, brought down by a bullet. I suppose that was the way he looked at it.
Interesting. Yeah. What about R&R and Enser and the like? Did you have much downtime?
I had, well, I think we were supposed to have a couple of R&Rs while you were out there, and most of us only had, I don't know what they did further down south, but up with us, one R&R people generally got in, and that was good, that was good. I always remember when I went, we went down to K16, which would have been Seoul Airport, I suppose, later. And we all fell in, and we marched out to, it was the biggest aircraft at the time. It was a double-decker, I don't know, it must have been, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, it was the biggest aircraft at the time. And one lot marched upstairs and the other lot marched downstairs, that kind of thing. And I was fascinated by the size of this huge airplane. Anyway, and then of course we flew to Iwakuni, and we were then bused to, not flown, we were flown to Tokyo, sorry. And then we went to a place called Ibisu Camp, which was an R&R camp. And the thing I always remember there was we took all our clothes off, and we went through a shower. And I always, the funny things you remember, I always remember it was lovely scented soap. I don't reckon we had a shower. Well, that was my first shower for 6 months or more. And we went out the other side, we gave them all fresh clothing. We kept our berries, obviously, and things like that. But I always remember that. And
was that the camp where you were assigned a Japanese girl who kind of looked after you?
Yeah,
and they were beautiful little girls that were like, yeah.
Cracking girls, yeah. And yeah, it was very good. But, and of course, being the only Air Force guy, of course, I clicked up with Aussies. I always seemed to click up in well with Aussies. And of course, I did a lot of the things they did in downtown and all the rest of it. But the only trouble with the Aussies was they always had this hatred of the Japanese. And when they used to get drunk, they start beating them up, you know. And I can remember being in one, and the MPs came in, you know, and I disappeared fast because I thought I ain't going to get caught up with this lot. But they were great. I liked the Aussies. They were a great crowd, and as long as you could give back the banter and the insults, you get along fine with them. Yeah, but yeah, R&R was that was good. The reason I suppose I could say I had 2 R&Rs because I went off and joined that HMS Glory. I went over to Iwakuni. I got on a night train up to Sasebo, joined the ship, and we sailed that day or whatever. And
what year was that then? Was that early 53 you went there?
That would most probably be early 53 when I went on the Glory. Most probably, yeah, would have been.
What were you basically told you're going to leave? What was the air base called where you were in Korea?
Fort George.
That was the name of the little aircraft.
Well, Fort George was the headquarters of the Commonwealth Division, and it was Fort George Airstrip. Yeah.
What were the circumstances around you leaving Fort George then? Were you just told, you know, we need you somewhere else? I mean, I know the Army doesn't kind of give you a reason, but...
Well, to go into the...
To the Glory, yeah.
No, I think, I don't know, maybe my CO did something, and he just said, you know, you can... I've fixed you up with a trip on the HMS Glory. So I did one patrol with them, you know, and came back and left them. I committed the unforgivable sin when I joined the Glory. You know, you're allocated to a mess, and they offer you rum. And with rum, there's sippers, gulpers, and see it off. I didn't know anything about that. And they offered me sippers, and I saw it off. I never lived it down. My son was in the Fleet Air Arm, and I always tell them, he said, "Oh God, yeah, you're lucky you got away." But they don't issue rum now. But it was good. I enjoyed that. I went down into the hangar and helped with metal repairs because I'd done lots of metal repairs, and I'd go up on the goofer's deck, as they call it, and watch the aircraft operations, and it was very interesting, very impressed with how smooth it all goes, you know. They're a great lot of guys, yeah.
Did many kind of miss the catch lines and jump into the net?
One time it bounced and knocked off a couple of serviceable aircraft, because they land and then they taxi forward to the front end. And I think it was one, I don't know whether he missed or what, I think it was possibly the pilot was injured or something like that, and he bounced on down and knocked off a couple of serviceable airplanes at the front end. That was the only major one that I saw, yeah. It was quite interesting watching them taking off, you know, and they sort of dip down and away, and they always have a helicopter standing by to pick up anybody, that kind of thing, yeah. And I went up with the batsman up to the net there where he is, just wanted to see that side of it, because I was interested in doing all sorts of things. And I got up there, and that's, yeah, quite a thing, doing this sort of thing. What was the other thing? I don't know whether it's naval wind-up, but when the aircraft is steaming, or the carrier is steaming, of course there's a good old wind down the deck. So if you're going across, he said, don't try going across because you'll finish up going down. Go across sideways, you see. And of course I did that a couple of times, and I've got a feeling that up in the bridge and all the rest, they're saying, you know, he's been told that by these guys, because that's typical Navy, you know. But it worked, it definitely worked, but I think I could have run across and linked into it. But yeah, it was very end. And then I had, as tradition, you go ashore for the last night, and they introduced me to Tory whiskey, was a Japanese whiskey. And oh boy, that last night on board, I left a very hungover person next morning, got on the train, went back to Iwakuni, back down to Curie actually, and then Iwakuni, went across and got Iwakuni, got another airplane back to Korea.
And so how long were you in Fort George airstrip for then? Were you there to the armistice?
I left about 2 months before the armistice, yeah. And yeah, must have been about 2-3 months before, yeah.
Okay. Before I sort of move away from it then, so are there any other stories that you can remember from your time at the base?
You know, when we say it's a base, it was, actually, when I first went there, we were at the east end of the airstrip, and there was near Pintail Bridges, which was the MSR crossed over there. And then we moved down to the west end of it, and 1913 light liaison flight, who their job was really, I think they had the Mark 6, for taking around senior officers and people between different parts of the country. They moved in at the top end, so we were down at the bottom end. I don't know, about 3 months before I came back, or before I left there, they were short of a corporal on 1913 flight, so I was sent down there to look after 1913, because we had 2 corporals by now. So 1903 I left them, which was a shame, but we were only at the end of the strip, so I could still keep in contact with my mates. 1913...
same planes, Osters?
Same, yeah. Mark. I think we had Mark 6, and they had Mark... similar airplane in the side-by-side seats, whereas with the AOP we had 1 seat for the pilot, the radio took there, and you sat in this swivel seat behind. Going back a couple of years ago, I went to a reunion. I couldn't even get in that back, into the back seat, because they're very cramped little airplanes, very small airplanes. The other thing about the Oster was the undercarriage, very basic. It was a cantilever, and on the inside of that it was bungees, no hydraulics or anything like that, bungees. So you used to put these 2 bungee cords on and it gave you that springiness. So you used to get it like a car jack, wind it up, slip the bungees on and you could fix it. The brakes, when we do, maybe I was going somewhere and we'd land on a bit of road or something like that, and we used the brakes a bit hard, you used to just lift the brake, I could lift the aircraft, stick a stone onto the stub axle, bring the little star wheel up, which used to be same on cars, like a Bendix brake it was, bring it up, having adjusted the brakes, and away we go again. It was basic, but very practical little airplane, yeah.
What sort of takeoff speed? 100, 80?
Oh, no, I'd say about 70 and 80, yeah. I'd say so, yeah. I never quite remember, but depends how many you were. At one time, we were over on the American front, and the pilot came in, and we stuffed 3 of us, I think it was, in the aircraft. We just about got airborne, and when we got back, they were going, you know, how many are in there? But yeah, very versatile little airplane.
Do you remember going over the front line? What you remember seeing? What do you remember seeing when you were over there?
Well, it was a bit like what they always compare it to the First World War, don't they? There were 2 static lines then. Yeah, we used to. I don't know if I ever could. I've got nothing sort of in my mind. I knew where the Hook was, I knew where 355 was, and all the different hills that we occupied. The Marines were on our left. And beyond it, which was very often, that's where the targets were, that kind of thing. No, I've no sort of real... I can remember that side of it, you know. You were flying over terrain and you were looking for targets and stuff like that. I know coming back once with Ken Perkins, who I was flying with him at that time, and we decided to come down low, and we flew up over the back of the Chinese lines and back to the base. And I always remember at one of our reunions, because we have little reunions, well, we did have, he was saying we were about 100 feet, he said, when we came back up with the Chinese. I said, I never saw any bushes grow to 100 feet in Korea. Because he was the one, in fact, who was flying the aircraft when Ken Goodfield got killed. Yeah, yeah.
He's a bit of a maverick pilot.
Well, he was a good pilot. Oh God, he could put things down, and I used to look and think, well, will we get? It's all right landing, but will we get off from there? You know, that kind of thing. But I did a couple of things like that with him. But saw Chinese jumping around because we're coming up so damn low. But no, other than that, no.
Great fun.
It was fun. It was good. I think it's the old business. You're indestructible. It's not going to happen to you. That's the way I always thought of it. I never thought of not coming back, sort of thing. Yeah. Plus, we were back from the line anyway, and yeah, it was. I think, as I say, when people say, "What do you remember about Korea?" I always say it was bloody cold. And of course, the Americans in the winter. Then, of course, it was the wet season. We're up to our blinking eyes in mud and taxiing the aircraft in muddy, because there's always that talk, that kind of thing. But, well, I've got pictures of mud and more mud type thing. We didn't have heaters in our tents. The Americans had commercially made heaters. They were like 2 great saucepans, one on top of the other, with sand on the bottom, and they had a proper metering system on it, and a tube out to a jerry can with a proper adapter to the jerry can. So you ran the fuel in onto that, and then you lit it, and you could adjust it. We didn't have those, so we made our own from ammo tins. And I did a drawing for my memoirs to show people what it was like. They were good. you know, you twisted a bit of wire around to control the rate of fuel into it. If you got it too high, the tin would glow red, and it was sort of going up the chimney, which was the the metal things that the shells came in, yeah. But no, they were good, yeah. And the other thing I remember, you could make a cup of tea and you could walk from about here to halfway up the garden, and it would be cracking nice over it before you got that far. And the night patrols, it could be -60 with the wind blowing, and your nose would freeze up, and it was bloody cold. And we didn't get parkers until way late on. And we didn't get sleeping bags until way late on. And mine was white. I always remember they gave us a white sleeping bag, but other people said they had khaki ones. Well, I mean, you could think climbing in there that with your boots and clothes on. It was a lighter shade of grey when I handed it in to be burnt, I suppose.
Yeah. What about wildlife? Did you see snakes and deer and dogs?
No, I didn't see any. There might have been down south, but where we were, what I did see, I mean, there were supposed to be these like big cats. I never saw one of those. I think a lot of those kind of things had perished because of the war. But the one thing I always remember was a snake, and it had a frog in its mouth, because you know they got big mouth, and it was obviously because they
digesting it.
Well, yeah, and the old frog's eyes were bulging. It was. I always remember that. And the other thing I always remember, when we went to look for Ken Goodfield's body down the river, coming across a whole pit full of snakes, water snake, and I had my Sten gun and I let fly into this, and they were flying all over the place and out into the river, and they were coming back like that. But no.
When you were on the Imjin, did you ever see any of the rafts floating down that the Chinese would use to try and knock the bridges down?
No. The only thing I saw in the wet season, because me used to rise about 40 foot, that ring of thing, was, oh God, trees, hoochies from most probably villages or something further. And of course the greatest danger was we had the Pintail Bridge, which was beside us, which was a very high bridge, was the damage that might do. And that was the idea, I think, of that cable that Ken Perkins hit, was to try and catch a lot of that stuff before it hit the bridge, you know. But no, I never saw any of that, no.
What about the locals? Did you meet many of the Korean locals?
Well, no, because, I mean, the locals were mostly down beyond Seoul. Our area was just bereft of any Koreans. Never saw. The only Koreans we had were what we called CATCOMs, Koreans attached to the Commonwealth Division, and they were mostly older people, and we'd use them as sentries and stuff like that. But no, the only time we'd see Koreans if you went back down to Seoul or beyond. Very few beyond that. Yeah.
Okay, and John Boyle.
Yeah, John. When I went out in 2000 and, when did I go? 2001, 2010. Yeah, this chap was there, and he was seconded to the U.S. Air Force flying F-86s. Yeah. Okay,
and you left just before the armistice. How did you feel? Were you ready to leave? Did you want to come home?
Well, what I'd forgotten to say was, when I was at Pembroke Dock and I got this posting to overseas, I'd fallen in love with this girl from St Athan, for Lantrit Major was the name of the place. And of course, I thought, I can't wait till I come back. I was going to Singapore, so I asked her to marry me. Well, of course, I couldn't get married because I wasn't 21. You had to have your mother's permission. My mother very reluctantly gave me permission, and we got married, and she was only 17. We went on a bus, and we got married in the registry office on a special license. So, yes, I was, and of course...
So you'd married before you'd come out?
I'd married before I went to Korea. yeah. As I say, I wasn't 21 because I think I was 19 or something like that. Yeah, my mother very reluctantly gave me permission, but I did. I got married, and of course, my first draft that I was going out was held back, so I had a couple more weekends with her, and she was pregnant, and she wanted to stay at home to have the baby rather than come out to Singapore to me. But of course, in the meantime, I was posted to Korea, and I didn't want to tell her because it was BFPO numbers, wasn't it? And so they sent a telegram to me on the Far East Flying Boat wing to tell me that I got father and all the rest of it. And then it was sent, and I've got it it was sent by sea mail up to Korea. So I eventually got it because the mail wasn't all that brilliant. So I got it sometime later. So I had a little daughter to come home to, she was 22 or 23 months old when I first saw her. Little bugger who didn't want to know me. So yeah, I was ready to come up. Plus the fact I'd been away. It was a 3-year tour in Singapore. If my wife had come out to me, I most probably wouldn't have gone to Korea. But never mind. And I've got no regrets. It's part of my life. It made me see things a lot different. It made me, I don't know, more aware of camaraderie and under those circumstances. And yeah, I don't know.
Life and death as well.
Well, it was, yeah, yeah. But no, I've got no regrets. It was an interesting part of my life, I guess, yeah.
And how do you feel about this sort of misnomer that, well, it's not a misnomer, but the misnomer that it's a forgotten war, and this, you know, having witnessed what you've experienced, you know, having sacrificed your time, you're missing your daughter, etc., etc. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, you see, I was listening to Radio Gloucester this morning, and they're talking about all the soldiers who were killed and since the Second World War, and the lesser wars in the meantime. No mention of Korea. You know, there's the Afghanistan. I'm not taking anything away from the guys. I mean, but no mention of Korea. And plus the fact, when you think of Bomber Command, how many airmen were lost in the Second World War? Not just soldiers, you know. But yeah, it is a forgotten war because I've mentioned to people, where was that, you know, and that kind of thing. Yeah, but it's, I don't know, it's just, I don't lose any sleep over it, but it just is a wee bit annoying. And as I say, I had an example of that this morning. I listened to them talking and I thought, well, there's no mention of that lesser war. And I mean, when you think of how many people died out there and how many people were wounded, just British or Commonwealth people, yeah.
Yes.
I got mentioned in dispatches out there, and people say, well, you know, what was that for? Well, I don't know what it was for. I did my job. But I can only think that on one occasion we had an aircraft went down on the north side of the river, and we recovered that, and I was in charge of that. But
how do you recover an aircraft?
Well, I've got a picture of it. How on the back of a 3-tonner, you can take the wings off those things fairly quickly, and I can't remember if we took the engine off or not.
So you went into the DMZ area, did you?
Yeah, the other area, yeah. And then we brought it back to the river. The Canadians provided a raft. We put it on a raft, and we got to the other side because there's the flow of the river, and then we put it on a 3-tonner and brought it back. I've got photographs of the aircraft. Yeah, yeah. So
that must be quite exciting to go over the river, because you'd only obviously flown over it, and then.
I'd been over the river quite a few times and up towards the front, that sort of thing. But I suppose I'm just trying to think what would be going on in my mind at the time. I mean, it was all an adventure, I guess. You know, I never. How many people most probably went out there ever thought that they wouldn't come home? That kind of thing, you know. It's the old business. You're young and indestructible. But yeah.
Did you enjoy swimming in the Gym?
I had a couple of swims in the Gym. Yeah. In fact, that chap who died in the aircraft when it hit the seawall. Ken Goodfield, he couldn't swim, and I remember teaching him to swim in the gym, and I thought, well, when he went in, crashed in there, you know, obviously I hadn't taught him enough. Mind you, the river, when it's like that, is flowing very, very harshly. Yeah, but yeah, I swam. Well, it was a good way of getting a wash, wasn't it? Because in the winter time, I mean, people, I don't tell people because I won't believe it, but you know the metal tins that 20 cigarettes used to come in? We used to get free issue, 20 cigarettes. And one of those full of water on top of this ammo box fire thing, and we'd wash and shave in that in the winter time, you know. But no, we never had any showers. Somebody said, you smelled? I said, we must probably all smelled. It didn't matter. But yes, it was nice to swim in the gym in the summertime, yeah. Because the summers were nice there, yeah. It was just the winter, the wet season, and then the summer. Yeah, summer quite pleasant, yeah. Good.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, that's a lovely interview. Really, really interesting as well. So pleased I got RAF in there. I mean, obviously I've had the Sunderlands, but, you know, to have observation flight and to have a story so close, you know, to the front line, and
yeah,
you're a great orator as well. So thank you very much.